Hey,
Right, I don't know where it's saving it to, but anyway, we can record.
we can, but I'm terribly sorry. We just run out of time. Mr. Jenkins, we have to leave it there. Thank you. Bye. Everything's all right. Go for it.
Most people will recognize you from Automata and obviously the Pie Man, but reading up on your story, things started to evolve into what people recognize as typical Automata humor in 1977. You were doing advertisements along with longtime collaborator Robin Evans. So how did all that start, and where did the humor come from?
Robin is a naturally funny man, and I'm a natural idiot. So between the two of us, I used to come up with scripts and concepts, and he would make them funny. So I'd give him a brief, usually sketch it out, scripts or basic line drawings. He'd and very, very careful instructions.
Hmm.
I would take them away, completely ignore what I want, and bring them back. And between the two of us, we created almost 1,000, I think, items of work.
Yeah, there's so much material.
So yeah, he didn't come in until 78,
Right.
and I'd been going for about a year by then. We were doing all sorts. It was a publishing house, traditional publishing house,
Hmm.
and we were publishing magazines for radio stations, maps for shit resorts like Benidorm and Miami.
Right, yeah.
So we send out hapless people trying to get advertising for these resorts. You know, stay at this hotel and hire this car. And anyway, I came up with the idea that instead of putting it on paper, I put it onto cassette tape. So
Right.
if you picked up your rent a car
Hmm.
at Miami Airport or Tenerife or somewhere,
Yeah.
you'd stick in the cassette out the airport, turn left, turn right, stop here, use this awful establishment discotheque or something. And then I started to add jokes, and that's where it began.
Right. Okay. So it's a bit like a precursor to sat nav, but with humor.
It was sat now with humor. It's also sort of precursor to geocaching, and in a way, it sort of was. It was multimedia,
Hmm.
or transmedia, it was then called. So
Right.
it involved a map, a cassette tape, and a physical location for putting these hapless tourists wherever I wanted them to be. They were very compliant, which was great.
Hmm.
So it was a virtuous triangle. We got a bit of advertising revenue. The airline, it was British Airways actually, and it was uh, Intersun and people like that. Remember Laker Airways?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Fly to America for, I can't remember what it was, 100 quid or something. Yeah, everyone who stepped off the plane got one of our cassettes and maps. So we came out of multimedia.
And so this is way, way before computers came on the scene, and there was the style for me of humor closely matches. Well, the closest match I can find is Spike Milligan.
I actually went to visit Spike Milligan last year. He was dead, but his grave is in a lovely place and very, very tranquil and gathering lots of moss now. And
Right. Love Spike Milligan. He was fantastic.
yeah, yeah, it was a big childhood influence, actually.
Right.
Uh, my childhood was mostly in the 1950s, which is Radioland,
Mm.
and they were dominant, really.
Yeah.
But also in Radioland back then were the likes of Frankie Howard and John Pertwee. So
Mm.
a lot Milligan and others. They were all childhood heroes of mine. Archie
Right.
Andrews. Archie Andrews was a ventriloquist dummy.
I know. Yes. A
Imagine that,
ventriloquist on radio.
great hero. So I wanted to. They were all featured in some way in the early games or the soundtracks.
Yeah, a lot of the early cartoons you've put out onto three separate volumes of printed book, which starts with Hot Pants, goes into Pie Bowler Disorder and Greatest Moments in Computing, and one of them stuck out for me. And strangely enough, I went back and read it again a couple of nights ago, and you said you it's one of your favorites as well, which is Frozen Stiffs, and you quite
Yeah,
rightly said it would have made a great film and TV series.
yeah, yeah. It was usually people say they're even still saying it. I'm just ahead of the curve, too advanced, especially with the multimedia productions I've been attempting recently. Too advanced, it's we're not going to get an audience for it.
Mm.
So I tend to end up doing things solo and not involving third parties.
That seems to have been going from the very beginning, because we're
Yeah.
obviously going to come on to things like Deus Ex Machina and that sort of thing.
When Frozen Stips came along, which was, I don't know, 30 years ago, it would have made great television, but of course you would have needed a production.
You'd need some blurring out here and there.
Oh, no, bollocks. Literally bollocks. No, that was a great idea to have the two leads, the male and the female, bollock naked throughout from the very beginning, and a very good reason why they should be. I mean, it's very very logical,
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
and the entire series, yeah, not blurring them out, but having happenstance objects in the way,
Oh, right. Yeah.
which I thought would be extremely funny because the audience would then be anticipating it going wrong. Today, of course, it wouldn't go wrong. So today we would have probably done it ourselves. Now we have the facilities to create.
Yeah. Netflix would have picked it up.
I've been involved with Netflix very recently at the Cannes Film Television Festival
Mm.
a couple of months ago, trying to flog my latest dream, which is something called Genie, which is an ethical antidote to Spotify and all the rest of it.
Oh,
And
okay.
Netflix and Amazon, Disney, they said, yeah, this is great, but they wouldn't touch it
Right.
because they wanted celebrities. They hated the idea of the audience voting their favorites. And they really hated the idea of no adverts, no AI. And above all, I wanted the artists, this is all about music. I wanted the artist and the fan to be able to get in direct contact with one another
Right.
via an app. And the big boys, they absolutely hated the idea that they would lose control. So even today, Frozen Stiffs, I don't think would happen through any third party. Frozen Stiffs is about an idiot who, for some reason, freezes himself in the 1930s, along with his very, very smart secretary. She's the brains. He's
Yep.
the literally the full frontal man. And they're frightened of the upcoming war in the 1930s. And when they thaw out in whatever it was, 1980 something,
87, I think.
yeah, 87, obviously we've lost the war. They just misinterpret everything. And the first thing they see is a shop window where the window dressers are just redressing the tailor dummies. So the tailor dummies are all naked, and they just believe that the world's been taken over by naked robots. So they try and fit in with this future world of naked robots, and there it goes. That's the
Moving on. So it wasn't long before computers came onto the scene, and am I right in saying you set up the first UK computer entertainment company?
if the first computer entertainment company was set up on the 19th of November 1977, then you are right. So far, nobody's claimed to be in advance of that. People were producing, of course they were. But I think mine, Automata, was the first commercial registered company to do this sort of thing. I was a radio producer at the time.
Hmm.
So I just used the cassettes we were already using for the travelogues, my radio experience to broadcast software code through AM and FM radio
Hmm.
to a huge public of about 3 people who had the computers. God knows what they were recording on back then. It was a long time, way, way before Uncle Clive.
Hmm.
Anyway, this is the Spectrum show.
I know.
Let me tell you about meeting Uncle Clive.
Go on then.
I was at this party somewhere or other, probably in Cambridge. I was old then, so I don't know what that makes me now. And then it was a fancy dress party of fantasy creatures. I don't know what he was doing there, but he was the archetypal nerd, loner. He was in the kitchen, hiding on his own,
Yes.
drunk, and staring at this young lady who had large mammalian protuberances.
Right.
So obviously he's the guy to talk to. I recognized him. It's Clive Sinclair, the guy who I've given money to for a smartwatch and a calculator,
Hmm.
homemade Z80 machine. Anyway, he was coming up. He'd done the ZX81.
Yeah.
I think the Spectrum was in his mind's eye. Yeah.
Okay.
So we fell to talking, and I remember saying to him, "You realize that your machine is going to be used for playing computer games on, don't you?" He thought it was for, mathematical and scientific problems
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
design and stuff. And he looked at me as if I was an idiot, which of course I was. But I was right and he was wrong. So no matter what he did, he changed our lives.
He did. He
And the
did.
reason we're talking together is solely because of that man. And the reason that the UK had a golden age of video games is solely because of him. I mean, we led the world for a good 3 years.
We did. We did. And of course the ZX Microfairs, which were
Ah,
massive and
my
organized
next book,
chaos, I think.
my next book will highlight Mike Johnson, who ran the Microfairs, as one of the leading figures in the world that nobody's ever heard of.
Right.
Changed the world of computing. He brought enthusiasts and amateurs together with the producers and the creators for the very first time. Before that, it was all, very small clubs and meetings in village halls.
Mm.
And he hired, fucking Alexandra Palace and, NEC and places like that. It was brilliant, brilliant man, lovely man. And I hope I can do him justice in the next
And
book, which we'll talk about in the future.
excellent. I've seen the pictures and read a few things about you and the Microfairs. It just seemed to be fun in a chaotic sort of way.
It was anarchy. It was great. It was fun. I mean, it didn't matter if you made any money at the time. We used to give stuff away in the end.
Mm.
I remember one time the tax man was allegedly in because the kids were queuing up and handing over their, pocket money in cash.
Right.
So, word went around, oh, be careful, revenue's in. And my good partner, Christian, who played this character called the Pie Man,
Mm.
he he asked Mike if he could come and do the PA system. And of course, the organizer, Mike Johnson, said, yeah, help yourself. And I heard the voice of Christian Penfold come out. Would the representative of Her Majesty's Revenue please come to the Automata stand? We wish to claim a tax rebate. So yes, it was anarchic. Sometimes if we sold out, we'd done well. So we'd go down the pub, hire the local band, and bring them in, to play to the audience.
Cool. You also with Automata and the Pie Man, you did a lot of a few TV appearances
Few
on
TV.
various things. And one I've just recently dug out was on the Magic Micro mission, where the Pie Man was introduced to a rather startled looking female presenter as he's a bit of a cult, and there was
Yeah,
this look of confusion on her face.
I was very, very rude on that, as far as I remember. Not rude, filthy rude,
No.
but very unpleasantly rude. The piss out of the presenters who were very young. I think I was dressed up as Groucho
You
Marx.
were, yeah, yeah.
I'll explain that in a minute.
I
There's an
mean,
Irish setter barking. There's always an Irish setter, Paul.
okay.
Irish setters have appeared in computer games, cartoon strips.
Along with parrots of various descriptions.
Oh, yeah, yeah. There's a cover with an Irish setter on. Anyway, cartoon strips in particular. What was I saying?
Groucho Marx.
Groucho Mel. I recall putting out my hand and this hapless presenter, this really professional TV presenter, stuck his hand out, and I was smoking a cigar at the time, and I flicked my ash into his hand. That is horrible, horrible arrogance. I was in character as Groucho Marx. For
You were
younger listeners, Groucho Marx was a very funny man.
skipping on to Deus Ex Machina for the Spectrum, which has been called many things, including revolutionary, and even just a collection of games you can't play, just watch. But it was very ambitious for the Spectrum back then. What drove you to do that on the Spectrum, or try to do that?
My entire involvement with video games is to force my rubbish music onto an unwilling public. So here's my music. Let's sling a video game in to force you to, play it and listen to it. So Deus Ex Machina is I suppose you call it a concept album back in the day.
Mm.
So there are no actual tracks. One follows on from the other. It's a soundtrack to a interactive movie. When it
You
was pirated, and it suffered horrible pirating, which in fact led me to leave the industry, and can't remember when, 84, 85, most people didn't bother to pirate the soundtrack. So
or in fact, I think I'm right in saying that when they pirated it, they didn't have the instruction sheet with it, so that nobody knew what the hell was going on anyway.
it was a video game which lasted an hour, and it took somebody through 100 years of your own life, from preconception to post-death.
You had
Um,
some very interesting people involved in that as well.
yeah, they were cheap. They were cheap porn, except for Sir Christopher Lee. He was expensive.
Didn't he come back and do the Deus Ex Machina 2 that you were working on as
Yeah,
well?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did a few things together. A very nice man, a lovely man, actually. Very, very good singing voice, but I only used him for speak. I used him on one audio track for an Ian Dury song. Somewhere on in the albums, you'll hear him
Yeah.
singing something or other.
And just at this point, I'm going to interject with a personal recommendation because your book, Deus Ex Machina, the best video game you've never played in your life, which you signed for me at Manchester many years ago.
Hmm.
I'm going to recommend that to the viewers because that is a superb book and it covers all the early Automata stuff and there's some really good and funny, interesting stories in that book. Anyway, we shall.
Excellent. Thank you for
We
the
shall.
plug. Stop
We shall
listening to this rambling, go and buy the book. Thank you.
uh, I'm not going to mention the comedy telephone line things. I'm guessing that was just for publicity or money or both.
Never got any money. Got involved with the famous Bruce Everest, who a legend in the industry. I was sitting with Rod Cousins one day. Rod launched Quicksilver,
Quicksilver, yeah.
bits others, and took over Codemasters. I don't know what he took over. He took over the world. And we were sitting there. He just fired his entire workforce. He was great at throwing strops, was our Rod. Anyway, we're sitting on our own in an office overlooking Southampton docks on the south coast of England. And the phone went. And it was this guy called Bruce Everest,
Mm.
who I think he ran Ocean, was it?
Imagine, I think, was he Imagine to start with?
Imagine, wasn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah. And Rod said to me, "Hey, it's Bruce Everest calling the receivers." Ah, Bruce, where are you now? We love you, really.
So a lot of people would have said at the start would know you from Automata, but you've done so many other things with celebrities and going forward, a lot of books not even connected to computers, which brings us on to your latest book, Mundanium, which, according to the flyer, tells the shocking story of the man who created the internet and the man who destroyed it.
Yeah, I loved the Olympic Games opening ceremony in London until Tim Berners-Lee was dragged on.
Right.
And the magic voice over said, "Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the internet." No. The internet was invented in about 1890 and launched in about 1910
Right.
by a Belgian guy. Let me tell you the story, if I may.
Yeah.
I'm an architect by profession. And when I was a young architectural student, a group of us students went up the road, up the A3, to a very, very posh sort of manor house run by or dedicated to a guy called Krishna Gurumurthy.
Mhm.
In his day, he was recognized as being the Messiah. He had oodles of followers from all over the world. What the Messiah was doing halfway up the A3 beats me. And it beat me then. Anyway, we're all sitting at the great man's feet, right, listening to these words of wisdom. And at the end, he said, "Any questions?" And my chum sitting next to me said, "Krishna Gurumurthy, who has influenced you most in your life?" And he closed his eyes and thought and said, "Paul Otlet." And this is the Messiah, right? And
Mm.
I'd never heard of Paul Otlet, so I wrote it down and then forgot about it for many, many years. And many, many years later, I had a gentleman called Monsignor Bruce Kent sitting at my dining room table. Bruce was he led campaign for nuclear disarmament, and I don't know, a cardinal or something. Anyway, lovely bloke, and we spent the day playing video games, which is another,
As you do.
as you do. I've got a very good photograph of him waggling my joystick.
Right.
Okay. Now, I said to Bruce, I interviewed him for, can't remember, one of the games machines, computer and video games, maybe, can't remember. I'll be saying can't remember a lot, okay? Because it's been a full life. And I said to you, I knew who his influences were. One of them was E.P. Thompson, the great Marxist philosopher, who was also on the soundtrack of Deus Ex-Machina. And I expected him to say Thompson or Jesus Christ, as he was Monsignor. And he said to me, Paul Otlet,
Oh,
who is a great pacifist and a thinker. So again, I wrote it down, didn't use it in the interview, and forgot about it. Many, many years later, a bit later, 1990s, I suppose, I was working in Antwerp, in Belgium, designing an artificial intelligence. Hey, always ahead of my time, folks. Which lived inside a little machine called a Scion organizer.
oh yes, yeah.
So here I am in Belgium, talking to my friend and colleague, Jacques Chapon, who ran this production company making video games. He was a very early buyer of Automata stuff at the Microfairs.
Mm.
I presume he took them to Belgium and pirated the shit out of them. I don't know. But good luck to you, Jack. He's a good friend. So I say to Jack, what you up to? And he said, I am researching the inventor of the internet. He was a Belgian. So I laughed. And for the third time in my life, somebody said, and his name is Paul Otlet.
Right.
Paul Otlet figure. So this time I didn't write it down. I started researching. Again, it would have been, oh man, it was like 25, 30 years ago. I don't know. So it's been in the drawer. It's been in the to-do drawer for a long, long time. When I was in Belgium, sorry, when I was there, I started researching more about Paul himself. But the reason that I'd never heard of him, and nobody else had really, how come this? I mean, he's a genius. He worked it all out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, your name, Paul. All Pauls are geniuses.
Of course, yes.
He worked out that, I mean, the telephone had just been invented. He worked out a typewriter had just been invented, yeah? And the phonograph had just been invented. And the radio hadn't been invented, but radio signals were being transmitted in Belgium at the time, turn of the century up to about 1910.
Right.
He saw immediately that you could string all these things together by wires and wirelessly. I mean, excuse my language, you'll have to organize this and edit it out.
Yeah.
This is pure genius. It was so far-seeing. H.G. Wells, the great science fiction writer, got to know his work and came up with all sorts of parallels 30 years later, for his so-called science fiction stuff. So Paul Otlet, he worked it all out. There's some diagrams, 100 diagrams and photos in the book. There's this book called Mundanium, which is just out, folks.
Just out.
Loads of diagrams and illustrations in there to prove that he did all this. But not only did he design it and conceive it, he built it. He had a mate, and his mate was a senator, and he won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Right.
He blagged all the finance for it. And the finance came from the Belgian government and mostly the local government. And they lent him this huge exhibition site. There was the great Brussels exhibition in around about, turn of the 20th century. And after it had finished, Paul Otlet blagged a huge space in there to create what he called the Mundanium. I've used primary source for the book So luckily he was a prolific diary writer.
Okay.
So all that's been absorbed, all the press articles, the official stuff, the war records. Very, very interesting story. And his work outside of technology and invention. I mean, he was a great thinker, great writer, a great pacifist. And he had an adversary, a younger man called Hans Hagemeyer. Hagemeyer was a Nazi, more by opportunity than conviction. And the things the men had in common, Hagemeyer was a generation younger, by the way. When I started on this, Hagemeyer was still alive, died at a ripe old age, a respected member of his community in Germany. I think he was in his 90s, the bastard. And he and Paul shared their love of libraries together. Paul Otlet, he wanted to turn all libraries into interactive hubs for the benefit of mankind, as he would say, and people kind, as we would say now.
Yeah.
And he actually got it up and running, this thing. You would phone up a special line as a subscriber. He worked out the finances, a subscriber, who won the Derby in 1921. And I think it ended up with it was millions and millions of files on punch cards. There's a system in libraries that we still use called the Dewey Decimal System. And Otlet took this. Paul Otlet created the World Wide Web in terms of masses and masses of data files, which were on little cards that we still use today in the form of, remember Rolodex?
Yeah. Yeah.
They're the same size.
Okay, right.
Exactly the same size as his invention. So Hans Hagemeyer, his great antagonist, also believed in the power of libraries and information, but for the completely opposite reason. It was to control the masses. So by the time he got into his stride in the 1930s, radio was under the control of the Nazis. Television, there were only public television parlors that broadcast authorized material.
Mm.
What wasn't under control were telephones. So you'd have to have telephone tappers, an army of to control that. Radio was now under control. The Nazis produced their own radios and practically gave them away. And they're only tuned to the official channel. So you either heard, Adolf or shitty dance music. If you retune them and listen to the BBC, you could do that, but then you'd get shot or taken to a concentration camp. So Hans Hagemeyer realized the danger of this newfangled idea of the mundanium. And by that time, the Belgian government had withdrawn their funding. So it was sort of in ruins because there was a war coming and they needed to repurpose their money. And he took over the space for the Great German Exhibition.
Oh, yes.
By that time, Belgium was a vassal state. It was part of the Reich. I don't know how much he destroyed. Nobody does, but it was tons and tons worth of material. Some survives to this day, but the vast majority rotted in old warehouses and forgotten files. And there are some heartbreaking photographs in the book of the wreckage of the mundanium. So one man invents it. Not only does he invent it, he builds it, and another man makes sure it is destroyed and almost written out of history. That's the bit that's very puzzling. How come he wasn't celebrated in the history books as a creator of the web? I don't know. I hope my purpose for writing the book is sort of to put the record straight and to mirror these parallel lives of two men who met only once. They only met once when Paul Otlet goes to Hans Hagemeyer's office, the occupying forces office in Brussels, to plead for the survival of the mundanium. I won't tell you what happens or how it happens, but you already know why.
Well, it sounds very intriguing. I mean, there are a lot of things like that throughout history. The Egyptians did it, the Mayans did it. When they didn't like something for whatever reason, they would obliterate it from any records, or they'd try to. Obviously, it was easier back then because you didn't have things like Internet Archives and all that sort of thing.
As you might well do to this podcast. Oh,
Oh no,
obliterate.
no, no. No, this is like me being sycophantic. This is like me talking to someone that's been with me since, oh God, since I was 20 odd, when I used to buy Popular Computing Weekly and jump straight to the back pages and just read and read.
Ah, those were the days, eh?
They
Free
were.
a whole page of free advertising once a week, and all I had to do was make people laugh.
It's been excellent talking to you. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to reading your book and finding out what happens.
Paul, thank you very much for your time. Here's to everyone listening to The Spectrum Show. Here's to Uncle Clive. Here's to Mike Johnson of Microfairs days. And here's to Paul Otlet, inventor of the internet.